about our event series. We are hosted by Trajectory Labs, which is a nonprofit that facilitates AI safety research and practitioners in general here in Toronto. We run events. We provide office space for independent or remote working researchers, and we're primarily interested in the largest possible risks from AI coming down the pipeline in the next 5, 10, 20 years, and what can be done about that. And yeah, we have uh, AI Policy Tuesdays every second Tuesday. We have an event specifically about AI policy and governance. And every Thursday, we have that's our AI Safety Thursdays. We have more technical types of talks related to technical AI safety issues. And with that, I'm going to pass things off to Catherine.
Cool. Thanks for that, Mario. I actually think we can maybe move to the next slide. I don't know who controls it. Cool. Actually, you covered that, so you can move on to. Oh, I can. I got it. There we go. Cool. Yeah, so this is Swim, and I speak about him in just a second. I just want to say a word about the other organization that also brings AI Policy Tuesdays to you, which is AIGS Canada. That stands for AI Governance and Safety Canada. We have the same concerns as what Mario just set out for you. Our angle is sort of like on the policy and advocacy side. So it's a very small nonprofit that is essentially trying to convince Canadian government to do something about those risks from AI from a policy angle, essentially. And so that's where I've been working for the past year and a half in a volunteer capacity. And what I've been doing there mainly to contribute in terms of the community is to develop, together with WIM and Suched, a Canadian AI policy course, which is currently running with the cohorts synchronously, but we are aiming to put that content online for AIGS members. If you want to have access to that, you can Google AIGS and find our Get Involved page, and there's a Slack channel you can sign up, and then you will be able to access that content if you're interested to do so. Yeah, so another word about me, my background is in law. I'm now an AI policy researcher at the Future Society, and I work at AIGS, of course, as well, as I mentioned, going to a fellowship with the Institute for Law and AI right now. So that's my world. But when it comes to Canada, Wim is my guru. When it comes to Canadian policy stuff, he knows what's going down on the hill, and that's what he's going to talk about and much more today. His background is also in policy, obviously. He's an independent researcher and working and contributing with all his deep knowledge to AIGS's mission. And I think with that, pass it over to Mario again.
Sorry, if anyone is very confused because they're here for a business intelligence workshop, that got moved to on the other side of the elevators in conference room 12E, because they were here until the last minute we changed. So, all right, looks like it was in the right place. Okay, I'll hand it off to Wim now.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Catherine. If no one else moves, I'll assume that you're all here for the right thing. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for being here. This is very exciting. And yeah, thank you to Catherine and Mario. Like, this is great. I'll say a quick note about myself. So yeah, thank you, Catherine. You introduced me. I'm very excited about this. I'm very excited to talk to you all about it. I sometimes talk quite fast, and I struggle to discern like complete kind of rapture and engagement from having completely lost the plot on your faces. And so if someone like tells me that things are really too fast or too slow, that would be great. If you have questions, that's also great. And note on questions, we would hope there's a time after the talk for talking about how the ideas in the talk intersect with people's worldviews at large. For the questions asked during the talk, if they're clarification about the content in the talk, that they like end in a question mark and such things. And questions such as like, how does this like fit with my worldview are not questions that are talk appropriate. But other than that, I'm very excited to your questions. Yes, how are we doing for my yeah, okay, so apart from that, I'm going to be talking about a kind of overview of the Canadian AI landscape and also how people are thinking about the Canadian AI landscape. So I talked to a number of Canadian bureaucrats. I was kind of born and raised in this cesspool that is Canadian bureaucracy in Ottawa. And I think I have a good sense of kind of how people think about this stuff. And I want to talk about kind of where their minds are at. I think where we're at in terms of AI more broadly and in terms of Canadian AI policy. And then where I think I would expect that we'll go from here and where we might go from here, where we could go from here. Yeah, so that's the talk. I want to start though first talking about this plane. Does anyone know this plane? Anyone recognize this plane? One or two. Okay, fantastic. Yes, Avro Arrow. Cool. Audience engagement. This plane was developed in the 1950s there's a documentary that begins something like this that talks about how elegantly it was like kind of gliding through the slides. There's like these very poetic sentences. It's like an hour long, um, which is kind of interesting. This plane never actually like really was a thing. It for like 5 times was canceled by John Diefenbaker's war contacts. And then during the Cold War, it was meant to intercept Russian planes that would have potentially been carrying nuclear bombs. And it went out of nowhere. Like this plane represented an effort to make the Canadian aerospace industry a thing, right? And these were like going to be the best planes you could get at the time, right? This is kind of mid to late 50s, early 60s, if I remember correctly. And they were a big deal. People were very excited about them. They employed a lot of people, and the program was canceled eventually. It was very abruptly also, and people had mixed feelings about this. Right, on the one hand, it was clearly over budget. It was not up to par, but there was a heritage minute about it. If you were doing that kind of thing, there is like a documentary about it. People tried to like do kind of museum type stuff. People love this plane, right? And people had mixed feelings. They felt like many people wish we'd kind of seen it through, and so much so that I've had a talking about it a while later, and I claim that the AI in Canada is kind of like in a public place. There's a lot of nostalgia. There's and by the way, yeah, there's a lot of federal research that is cutting edge. That is kind of makes us a global leader. That's back to federal money. But we kind of only go halfway, right? We don't kind of leave it until it's in orbit, but we don't often see things through, and that leads to the fruits of all of that research going to foreign nations, usually America. And by the way, all of the researchers who were working at the Avro planes were then sent off to NASA in the States. And in AI, that's what kind of cover. I'll go over a very, very brief history of where Canada's at in AI. There is a sense of like wanting to lead. Like Canada was a leader in a couple of ways, and like we want to restore our leadership, right? The things that the press releases about AI that come from the government often talk about, securing Canada's AI advantage, and maintaining leadership. But like, what exactly are we leading in? What is the way that we're leading? It's not very clear. It doesn't really matter though either, right? We're kind of there's this kind of sense of insecurity or self-consciousness about where we stand on the global stage, what we mean as a country. We try and invest this in these national tech projects or the vestiges of them, and then but we don't necessarily have a clear sense of where we want them to go, or that has been. And this is true in a couple of senses. So something that I think, as we'll get to, there are lots of AI researchers who have done a lot of the research that has underpinned the last 3 years of progress. But we also have a pretty or had the foundations of pretty respectable hardware industry in Canada. So post World War II, there was a lot of federal investment, also kind of military adjacent, that resulted in the creation of a tech sector. And I'll talk about Ontario, right, Ottawa and Toronto, because I know these well. But first in Ottawa, then it's kind of expanded to Toronto, right, second half of the 20th century, and they were doing a lot of great stuff. We were the kind of, if you go back to in the 80s, we were kind of we were on the cutting edge. Today, like if I talk to someone about chips, they'll talk about mostly Taiwan, right, but Japan, about Korea. They will not mention Ottawa, right? We manufacture. We have like one semiconductor fab in Ottawa now. We have very, very little on a global scale. We don't lead in this, right? And why is that? Well, there are a lot of reasons that chip making, as we may get to, is like unbelievably difficult. But we still have a lot of talent here, right? I think if you walk down King Street, as I do to get to this building, I passed by NVIDIA office, which is a major chip manufacturer. But there are a lot of American companies, and even Taiwanese and other companies that have chip design branches in Canada. Because what happens is that these startups as they kind of start to, do so well, or they get a great offer, they all sell out. Right. So these are all examples of companies that have sold out to AMD, to NVIDIA, these kind of major chip design companies. And this they kind of they go back some time. But this one, Untethered, this is 2025. This was like a couple weeks ago. They sold to AMD, and they were going to be working on chips for that were especially good for kind of running AI models, which is like a big thing right now. Right? You would have thought they would do it in perfect, right? And by the way, the researchers were doing this. I think they were from UT, but they're definitely kind of they have kind of built their careers with the help of kind of federal people. And so all these people now work at the major kind of chip companies that all the people in the chip world would know. Even though they're all kind of based in Canada, they're based in Iowa. They're based in Toronto. And one other kind of example of this, I left out a big one from the last slide, Nortel. Do people know Nortel? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So there's this, and maybe it doesn't apply in this room, but there's this article that I'm linked to here. It says, "When We Were Kings: The Rise and Fall of North American Mail." And it starts off by talking about how you could, if you want to see what a generational divide looked like, you could kind of ask what they know what Nortel is. It doesn't work because Nortel back in the day, like people now don't know about them, but back in the day they were like this massive company. And they were one of the top 10 most valuable companies in the world in their peak, which was I don't know. I'm too young to know, it's like the 1998, 1990s. They employed 100,000 people. And this went down for other reasons, like there was corruption, there was like kind of bad accounting, there was fraud. But there's this sense of like, oh, we used to have one of the best IT infrastructure companies in the world. And we don't have that anymore. Like, how do we restore our lead? How can we make 2030 a time where we can pretend that the flip between 2000 and then never really existed? But it doesn't work, right? Like we've had this federal funding for chips, right? And Canada isn't a major player in the chip world, and it's very far from it. And this is also true in other facets of AI, right? Like we know this, right? The Nobel Prize winners from this past year, Canadian researcher. These are all people whose names I'm sure you've all heard before. And by the way, I'm not painting a representative picture of the kind of AI physical research landscape. It's more like these are the vibes of people in Ottawa, as far as I can tell, when they think about AI in Canada. What are they thinking of? They're thinking about these people who 20 years ago made the foundational breakthroughs that have driven the last 20 years of AI progress, right, all the way up into today. And these are all Canadian, right? Richard Sutton, David Duno of Trajectory Labs, Jeff Clune. Hinton sold his startups to Google, right? He was a UT prof. Rich Sutton, I don't know exactly how this happened. He didn't want to move, but like Edmonton has a Google office, ostensibly like basically just for him, right? Like that's how far they're willing and able to go to coach these Canadian researchers. They do know didn't go to Google. I like him, and the kind of the dynamic here, right, is that we fund all this research. When it comes to like commercializing the research, we're just benefiting from the research in general, but benefiting Canadian economy, benefiting Canada's image on the world stage. We don't really get the money. There's more stuff you can say about the people on the last slide, but they have extensive Wikipedia posted on them. And so this is my kind of frame, right? I want to be clear here that this isn't like all of what's happening. These are outflows. There's still like a sizable amount of value that's left in Canada, but I think these are big outflows. So what you kind of have happen is you have this federal research, right, into chips, into AI researchers, and that stuff goes back, right? Like we were doing AI research way before it was cool, right? Like CFAR was founded in 1982 with one of its main priorities, the Center for Advanced Research, right? Center for Advanced Research, with one of its main priorities being AI robotics, right? 1982. And then on the back of that, right? That's how Hinton was hired to fund that program in the 2000s. So what happens? So okay, we train all these great researchers, right? We train these Waterloo engineers. We train, pick your school. And out of the town goes to the States, right? I think there's something like 30% of just like we did in the last couple of years as in science students when all these things together. Or it stays here, right? They'll do research, right? We'll do a startup. And the startup, either the startup is successful, which is great, until it's not, and then it gets bought out by the US when they're kind of struggling, not doing so well, or the startup is not successful, and then they're also bought out by the US, and then you end up with all of these American companies having locations all across Canada, all of these all these companies from other countries having locations in Canada, um, um, using our researchers, right? And okay, yeah, and then the other part of it is like even if the talent stays and they work in companies, then that research there that they do is commercialized abroad. And the IP from it is bought by other countries, by companies that are more capable of doing something with it, and then they make a bunch of money off of it. But astute listeners will notice that most of the value in these cases, actually all the value in these cases, the kind of final point that is not at the end of each of these slides, is that the US gets most of the benefit, right? And it's not just the US, it's also China and others. But this is kind of dynamic that I want to point to, and then I think there you could kind of nitpick at some of the details here for sure. But I think this is something that kind of ails policymakers who are trying to think about AI research commercialization and tech tech in general in Canada, and it also applies to AI. Okay, and so you have, why is this, right? So here's my kind of very kind of oversimplified vision of what's going on. You have on the one hand, America has a lot more money. The American companies have more money. They get paid their researchers more. And this is just we're just stuck right beside them. It's very hard to move as a country by definition, and that makes things hard. And then on the other side, there's this old saying that Canadians talk like Hamiltonians and rule like Madisonians, and Americans talk like Madisonians and rule like Hamiltonians. Right? We have Hamiltons. Right?
So I think you repeat that a bit.
Yes, actually, it doesn't matter. It's kind of confusing. The point is, Americans talk a big free market game, but actually, especially when it comes to a lot of stuff in the tech world, they're very protectionist, right? They have a lot of policies to protect their own industry, and don't just let that companies come and go as they will. And Canada talks of like a protectionist, like we need to kind of foster this sector in Canada, we just foster that sector, but actually, it doesn't actually do a lot or it doesn't do enough to actually protect that industry. It doesn't do enough to make sure that the talent or the IP or the benefits in general stay in Canada, right? And there are some kind of things that may be illustrated here in the negotiations over CUSMCA, which was before that NAFTA. The US had like dozens of people who are experts in digital IP, IP price negotiations in general. And Canada had none. Like they had, I think like 0, 1, 2, but not very many. Right? They're not even thinking about this stuff. And by the way, the kind of the case, and there's this kind of this other kind of idea that in other sectors, not AI, you have a lot of kind of positive spillover effects from having a branch plant in Canada, right? So Korea developed a world-leading auto sector over the course of decades by having basically the bottom line is like you can have a foreign company come to your country and make stuff in your country, but like the people in your country can then learn how to make that stuff, and there's a kind of a lot of passive stuff, a lot of things that are not so visible that go into building an industry, and you can obtain those things. So there's something that being a branch plant economy can have some positive spillover effects, and I think that this is less true in the case of AI. And actually, it's not really true in the case of AI because things work differently. Like what you need is the right to be able to sell the thing yourself. What you need is the rights to the research that you're doing. And there's also this kind of going back a little bit, this related problem where like it's just really, really capital intensive to build an AI company. Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you're describing or leading up to a question of whether industrial policy is a good thing, and whether focusing on AI is something that the Canadian government is eager to, willing to, or as some version to doing.
Yeah.
And there are examples like in Taiwan where the government basically made a concerted effort to be a player in that electronics. And over a long period of time, they had to sort of stick to it as to actually succeed in it. So is there an industrial policy kind of yes or no, black or white type of approach?
It's a great question. And I'm actually gonna not answer it, leave that as foreshadowing. I hope this is on the front of your mind. Like, is this a yes or no thing, right? Is this like context dependent, etc.? Great point. Very true. I have an answer to the question there. We're building to it. Thank you. Yeah, so on the one hand, right, we kind of spend all this federal money through this effort, but then the fruits of that labor get poached by the American, right? You'll note the mismatch, that's the and on the other hand, we can kind of not do that and don't spend the money in the first place, right? And then maybe we don't get the like half-baked AI sector. But what we've ended up doing is kind of, I think, the worst of both worlds, where there have been a lot of halfway there attempts to revitalize and fuel Canada's AI sector and AI research over the last several decades. And what's happened is that we kind of bring them all the way, and then when times get tough or something happens, then we lose out. And American is different. And I would not say that industrial policy is good or bad. Well, I might, but outside of this talk, I would just say that I think if we're going to do industrial policy, I think it does make sense in a lot of places. We should kind of go all the way, right? As opposed to, or not doing it. Troubles of technology. Yeah, and so again, this is just kind of more some vibes, right? You have this problem where this is the Avo era, right? This is a thing of we're gonna make this a massive part of our identity as a country. We're gonna employ a bunch of people in this. We're going to have it be this massive project that costs a ton of money, and then we're gonna cancel it. And I claim that you have this like privitism and similar thing, right, from like the CSC of like you have the kind of too much on each side. It's like how do you kind of not try that course? And I claim that we're both in the whirlpool and also like the kind of the ship of that is the Canadian tech sector is being kind of chewed up by the monster at the same time, right? Kind of but we're kind of suffering from both. We're as I understand. Yeah, okay, cool. So that's kind of like the vibes-based assessment. Like that's a very that is my sense of how I think people think about this. I'm gonna move forward in time a little bit, and it's the more boring part of the talk. So that was boring. Let's strap in. I want to talk about what exactly Canada has done. Right, when I say we have these half-baked industrial policy attempts, like what does that look like? And I'm going to start in 2017 with the Pan-Canadian AI strategy. So this was, if you go and look at the global indices of how countries are doing, different countries are doing AI. When it comes to the federal AI strategy, Canada ranks pretty highly, in large part because of this program, where they said, okay, you know what, we're going to double down on AI research, right? Because that's our strength, I guess. We're going to establish these 3 institutes, or like rebrand 2 of them and establish one of them. Nila, Vector, maybe, right? We're going to give a bunch of money to companies that are trying to commercialize. We're going to do a bit for people that establish some standards. Yeah, but mostly we're going to fund research. I mean, about half the money from the federal. And this was funded in 2017, and then again in 2021, where there was a phase 1, phase 2 thing. In total, the funding was about $5.6 million across both 4-year periods. And and about half of that went to talent, and then the rest of that kind of went to programs for commercialization / investing in etc. Always on the slides. That's not necessary. And then jump ahead 3 years, and this is the kind of this is not I'm not following linear time here. We're going to step into that for a second. Just for one, you have $2 billion invested in AI infrastructure, right? Where we kind of there was this report from the dais. There were many things that brought us about this report from this that kind of made very clear that PV infrastructure was ailing. We researchers, a lot of AI research is having access to the chips that you need to do the work, and we did not have access to great chips. So they said we're going to fix this. We're going to put $2 billion towards setting up a kind of a public compute fund that researchers can access and companies can access. And then it was 2.4 billion in asset overall. You might have seen the headline 2.4 billion. The other 0.4 billion of that was they set up the AI Safety Institute. They set up the AI Advisory Council, which is really nice to so we can back with it. They also set up the Safe Advisory Council. So they kind of set up one advisory council, and said then they kind of realized that the responsible AI is an important thing, right? The second phase of the parenting AI strategy was about responsible AI. So let's set up like a safe, yes. Yes. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
What do you mean about
That is an excellent question. Broadly positive. Yes. What do I think of DeepSeek's approach to trying to innovate, where you're kind of trying to be much leaner, right? You don't depend on these big chunky models, and you kind of build off of you trying to be a fast follower, build off of American. I feel good about it, and we will talk more about that later. Yes, I hope I'll throw you with a second this question. So yeah, and so there was a $2 billion, and then they're like, we'll put a little bit towards like adoption. We'll put some towards commercialization. Like they loved people trying to commercialize efforts that would improve adoption. Right, that's right. And then these two advisory councils. And then it's kind of the elephant in the room, but it didn't happen, right? Like this talk, there's a version of this talk where 40% of it is about this bill, right? This is part of Bill 627. The Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, right? Was part of Bill that had a bunch of stuff about AI needing to be good, right? It needs to be transparent and so on. And the bill didn't get passed, right? The bill got stuck in Parliament, and then it died with the previous government. And the current AI minister, spoiler alert, doesn't seem to have any plans of reviving that. But AI was also kind of vague, right? And this is a bit of a tangent, but it gets to kind of a broader problems in the Canadian government, where there's trouble kind of building up expertise often. What put that aside, we'll talk about later. Basically, they were like, as concerns Trajectory Labs, we were focused on kind of large scale distributed AI systems broadly, right? So I'll just talk about how they talked about how they would set up a process for deciding what they would do about the high impact risks, which they would also identify through this process in this bill. Which is to say that they weren't really sure what they were going to do about it, but they were going to do something about it. And people may know a lot more about it than I do. And so please speak up when the time comes. But so there was almost something in this bill, but the bill didn't happen, right? So with the long and short of it being that we don't really have any federal AI policy in Canada. There's other stuff that didn't happen in the fall economics from last year. There's $50 million in incentives for building in data centers. So for further building up AI infrastructure in Canada, right? And there have been there's like this $70 billion project that was announced in Alberta last year as well. Will it come with the money for that? We don't know. It would have been the biggest data center project in the world as the time was announced. But we don't know what's going to happen with that, and it's not AI policy. So there's maybe some movement happening, but we don't know, and these things didn't happen. And then there was some other stuff. Canada was part of this global effort, set up the global partnership on AI. A significant part of which was, I think, based in Montreal. There was the directive for automated decision making was up to the government. There's kind of a bunch of principles to follow about how to deal with automated decision making. We call people who are victims of poor automated decisions. And then there was a voluntary code of conduct that was set up by the person who was in charge of innovation, science, and technology in Canada. as in a kind of interim thing for when ADA isn't there, right? So they're like, okay, we're going to get ADA, but we haven't had anything forever. And so until we get that, we will set up these principles and follow, right? And I'm not going to go into too much depth in these things because they didn't happen or they're voluntary, right? They're like things that you should do, like being fair and transparent and ethical, in case you had any objections to that. Yes.
Why do you think there was a lack? Like, just feels like disgusting. Why didn't it happen?
Well, why didn't it happen? Why didn't the Avro era of AI happen? Why didn't which
Yeah,
thing?
like, emergency to bring this to
Mhm.
how this we don't see
It's a great point. Why didn't they do that? Why don't they have that energy? That's a good question. I feel I would want to return. I would finish this and then I would love to return to that. Because we did have some stuff up in 2025, right? So we got a ministry for AI, right? Which is kind of a big deal, right? You don't really have very many ministries. Of the 150 some MPs that were elected, you get like a dozen or two people who are given a title like this, right? And of course, they don't have their own department. The ministry for AI doesn't have its own department. It's housed between two departments, but we have a ministry for AI, right? And clearly we want AI to be a big deal, and maybe we're not exactly sure still in what way we want it to be a big deal, and by we I mean the county government. But we said it with more gusto now than we did 5 years ago, or it turns out. So there was so often what happens is you have all these departments, and then they each get a mandate letter, right? They get a letter of what they have to do in further departing from the Carney and his dooms, or I think not that I think badly of that at all. But they all got one mandate letter this time, right? So it was there was a much kind of the things that were going into that mandate letter went to everyone in the government, and they had some stuff in AI on that, right? And this was about AI, automation of AI, or using ChatGPT in the government, right? Like we want government people to be using ChatGPT. So does that matter? Maybe not, but like it was in the letter. There was only one of them as opposed to one for every department. Maybe it's like we kind of want to hear about it. More recently, there was an announcement that came up that resulted in this was Evan Solomon, the minister for making investments that were matched, bringing the total to $100 million invested in Canadian AI startup services at an event a week or two ago. And then before that, at the G7, there was an announcement. Keir Starmer, Commissioner of the UK, and Mark Carney had a beer, and they talked about all the things they will do together. And one of them was that the UK government will start using Cohere, right, which is Canada's big AI company. And they'll use Cohere for all their stuff, like, and that there would be this collaboration with the UK as an institute and the Canadian institute. So that's very exciting, right? The UK Institute, I think is a great institution. I think they're probably the best AI institute in the world. I think that they're actually so much better than the Canadian AI Institute that the Canadian AI Institute will have to significantly up its game if something's going to happen there. And then about again, like a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, Jeffrey Hinton, who was very worried about large scale risk from AI, met with Evan Solomon, the Minister for AI. And we haven't heard anything about that yet, right? And sorry, the kind of elephant in the room here is that Solomon, in questions were like, okay, well, we'll follow up data. What policy are we going to have going forward? What regulation are we going to have going forward? It wasn't clear then, and it's maybe even less clear. Well, he said that it's not really his focus. His focus is on adoption. His focus is on commercialization. His focus is on reviving or maintaining, securing, having Canada be a global leader. It's AI industry being global. And so, yeah, what is the relation look like? We don't know. If there will be any at all. You think there must be some at some point, but and surely at some point. Not in the short term. And then another thing is that, and this is, I don't have much on this because it's not clear how it'll go, but a significant portion of money, also the G7, Carney announced that he would set aside a very large part of Canada's budget and put it towards defense spending, right? So they're going to meet NATO's requirement ahead of time, I believe. And they've mentioned AI a couple times in this, right? We'll do research into try to mitigate cyber threats from AI. They're setting up this program called Borealis, also getting a sizable amount of money. And that's also working on AI, but we don't really know what it looks like. So there's more enthusiasm. There's more enthusiasm for this government. There's more they're kind of all going in different directions, right? Like you have some stuff on commercialization, some stuff on like military stuff, and like the UK will use Cohere, and also like a safety institute collaboration. Like we don't really know what's going on. And again, the bottom line here is the things are happening. Maybe go a lot of different ways. Yes.
So I have a two-part question. You mentioned that Canada has one of the best research.
Yeah.
A lot of things are research is happening in Canada, but when it comes to the execution, they go to US. Do you think it's because of a lot of excessive regulations happening in Canada before we building industry, the industry? There's so many safety places, like regulations are there, that there's besides not worthy to commercialize it here and go to. Do you think it's excessive regulation because of that?
That's a great question. This might touch on some stuff around like a kind of regulation that I don't know a lot about, and so I would like to just like not answer on that part. But apart from the ones that may or may not exist, but that I don't know because that's like a kind of a black hole in my mind. I think that, and one of the things that I'm trying to emphasize here is that we really don't have a lot of regulation, right? And the ADA was covering both people using AI, right, and also people making it. I think it probably has a lot to do with that the tax rates are lower in the US, and that you have these positive spillover effects that come from having a lot of people in the same place, right? It's notable that we still have a tech sector in Canada, a suburb of Ottawa, 70 years after there was investment in that place, right? Because you have this kind of mystical thing about like some places just attract people and they attract more people, they attract more people. It's much easier for a lot of reasons to do a startup in San Francisco. And it's much easier than that than to do it in Canada. But I would say that like in looking at the other like that we actually don't have a lot of regulation on AI in Canada, other than the stuff that I'm not sure about. I don't know all that. There's some stuff like about starting a business and getting and like the like tax credits system being like it's this thing called SHRED that is relevant to especially to people. Right, this isn't the people who are like doing startups, and people don't try to figure out like do we need more SHRED, we need less SHRED, whatever it is, SHRED is the problem. But I don't think the problem is too much regulation. I think it's just part of this kind of fundamental problem of like, you know, we're like there's a force that's pushing this way. The force pushing this way is just a bigger force, right? And this force is lower tax rates, bigger markets. Yes.
Talking about the elephant in the room, the very big orange elephant,
Yeah.
trade negotiations are kind of getting in the way of determining our stance on AI. So quickly the no sales tax was scrapped. And I'm sure that there's these ongoing force trading going on there. I'm sure they don't want to step too much forward until they have a clear framework of how we negotiate with the US, which has the largest countries that would be affected by any regulation.
Sure. Yes. But, I missed the question. Sorry.
But the question is like when it comes to determining any regulation action, would that be in concert with trade negotiations in the US? It would make sense to expect uncertainty delay based on the time of together.
Yes, it would be. I think that will be a problem, or will be a problem once they actually take on the task of trying to make Canada Canadian agriculture. And I think that as of right now, that's just it's like not even on the table. Once it's kind of on the table, but it's not even we're not really there, right? And I'll talk briefly about where I think we could go, and in the places where we talk about that, those things will be. And the thing that I want to emphasize here, right, because hopefully the boring part of the talk now is over. Yes, talk it. We'll walk through the back.
Have you been like how that selection
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
how is the funding that when you do different places like reforms selection
Yes, I do, but there. Yeah, the question is what is the process by which the panels that determine the allocation of funds, like all this kind of funding that we're talking about, this $506 million in the Pan Canada Foundation, for instance, what is the process of that being allocated? I don't have insight into the specifics of that. I have a high level theory of how decisions get made in government in general. And I like worked briefly on a campaign and like worked with done some other stuff. But that is too long and too radical to talk about right now. But I'd be happy to talk about that. Um, but that's your question. I don't know. But yeah, the thing I want to get back to is that like, what happened to this? Right? Like, what happened to like we are going to make like we are going to go from 0 to 1 in terms of like an industry, right? It doesn't really matter what. I want to clear that like I'm talking in this language of being very pro industry for commercialization. I'm actually not like like foaming at the mouth pro commercialization or pro AI industry growth radical. But there's a kind of energy here that I think is missing, where we talk like we want to be a global leader, but we don't really make the investment, right? Like $2 billion sounds like a lot in a vacuum, but in the context of what's happening right now, it's kind of nothing, right? Like the guy who made that happen, you'd hope that it would be like 10 times as much, right? At least. And that's hard to do, right? Because we're a middle power. We don't have the money necessarily, but you know, I don't remember offhand like how much it costs to train GPT-4, but Francis would know. It's like it's much more than we're kind of we're acting like the game is happening at a scale that is like 10% of what's actually happening. I don't know if that would make sense, but if you look at the CHIPS Act, right, with this very large Biden-era industrial policy, they put about 1% of the U.S. government's income from that year, I think it's 2022, towards incentives for some developing semiconductors, right? You have this whole other thing where like all the semiconductors are being developed in Taiwan right now, and therefore Taiwan is being invaded, and so they want to kind of onshore lots of manufacturing, but also semiconductor manufacturing. And that was just for trying to make chips happen in the United States, right? And like they're much better placed in a lot of ways to do that. And also, I'm not even talking here about the absolute amount of money, right? Like, what was I think it was something like, I think this 1% is about $50 billion. And then if you kind of put together the 2.4 billion and then the $500 million and change from the Pan-Canadian strategy, you get like $3 billion, right? So in absolute terms, they're wildly different. But also, we're putting less money in as a portion of how much money they got the government had in a year. And that makes sense, right? Like the U.S. is a global leader now, obviously, but this is for developing a sector that they don't have right now. And like this is not this, right? We don't have this, and some people want this, and Canada talks like it wants this. We don't make it. And so I think there's a kind of this disconnect, right? And what do I think is kind of, well, and anyway, so maybe to summarize a little bit, we have this thing where we kind of go halfway, but then we're not sure of ourselves, and we back off, and then everything that we did to make the first half happen dissipates and goes elsewhere. And we also have this dynamic where we talk a big game, but then when it comes down to it, the things that we need to have happen, we're not really making happen. And I hope the vibe that you got from the middle boring half was this, that we have a kind of like a lot of pebbles at a park, and hope that it makes some henge somehow. Like, you know, we have this advisory council, then we like make another advisory council for another kind of AI, and then you know, we'll like invest in AI infrastructure, and then we're going to invest again in AI infrastructure in different projects. And it kind of it's definitely a little there, right? Okay, and then I'll talk briefly about another dynamic, right? That's kind of emerged recently, like 2024, 2025. Is this desire for sovereignty, as opposed to responsible AI or just leading an AI globally, right? I think there's been this concern that like, oh, you know, we don't have leverage over these foreign tech companies, right? Like they can just decide not to put CBC news links on their platforms. They can pressure the government to scrap the digital sales tax. They can they could, if AI becomes like what railroads were in during the Industrial Revolution and in the wake of it, it's this kind of fundamental thing, right? Like we don't want that to be like another country's AI systems run that are running data centers in another country, and it's like they could just cut it off, maybe, right? Like that's a major reason. And so we want like